Hello and welcome back to this video series regarding changes to the ISO 14001 standard that became effective in September 2015. These videos have been developed with facility management teams in mind to provide an overview of the changes to the standard with some hints on planning a transition for your organization. Hello again, my name is Bill Barnes. I am an IRCA registered principal auditor and BAC certified responsible care auditor and management systems trainer. With about 15 years experience in developing and assessing environmental health and safety management systems, I've taken my learning curve and applied it hopefully for your benefit. In part 2, we will explore the realignment of the standard, including new concepts and where they are added. Let's begin. As you may recall from part 1, the Annex SL format has been adopted. Clause 1 describes the scope of the standard. Clause 2 provides normative references, and there are none. Clause 3 provides terms and definitions related to organization and leadership, planning, support and operation, and performance evaluation and improvement. It might be useful for you to take a look at those terms and definitions, particularly some of the new ones that we are introducing in these presentations. In part 2, we'll explore the realignment of the standard, including new concepts and where they are added. Clause 4 presents the context of the organization as we described in part 1. It also includes the old general requirements for defining scope and the management system itself. The scope needs to be documented and now available to interested parties, in addition to the policy. Also, the management system should not only achieve its intended outcomes, but enhance the organization's environmental performance. So it will be important to review the scope of your EMS up front in reorganizing to meet the requirements of the new standard. Clause 5 presents the leadership elements as described in Part 1. Parts of the former Clause 4.4.1 are divided amongst 5.1 and 5.3. Also, the policy requirements are now located here. An interesting change is that there is no longer a requirement to appoint a management representative. However, former duties accomplished by a management representative must still be assigned to competent persons. Clause 6 presents planning elements, otherwise now known as actions to address risk associated with threats and opportunities. Here's where our old friends, aspects and impacts from former Clause 4.3.1 can be found, as well our old friends, legal and other, from Clause 4.3.2 are now known as compliance obligations. Part of Clause 6, 6.2 to be exact, contains details on requirements for establishing and pursuing objectives, formerly objectives, targets, and programs from Clause 4.3.3. Over the years, many clients have struggled separating objectives from targets. Now the target word has been removed, and objectives can be targets and vice versa. The point is to have measurable means to demonstrate continual improvement through planning actions to achieve objectives. Clause 7, support, in the revised standard covers a lot of ground, including a number of former clauses. It includes yet some more of former Clause 4.4.1, not otherwise defined under the leadership clause in Clause 5. Competence and awareness requirements are defined here. Notice the specific lack of the word training in the title. It is still an expected tool to drive awareness and achieve competence. Yes, it still includes those whose work has the potential to cause a significant impact. However, there is strong emphasis on the competencies for those who determine and evaluate environmental impacts and compliance obligations, contribute to achievement of objectives, respond to emergencies, perform internal audits and evaluations of compliance. These competencies can be demonstrated through resumes, job qualifications, outside certifications, etc. Internal and external communications should still be maintained as documented information with processes that conform to Clause 7.4. Strong examples of processes for tracking communications that I've seen in the field should continue to be effectively address the requirements as revised and relocated here. Welcome to a new concept, that of documented information. This combines former clauses for documents and records and overall documentation. There is more flexibility in approach than we've seen in the past. For example, an EMS manual is no longer required. The extent of documented information can vary significantly based on the size and complexity of activities and operations, compliance obligations, and the organization managing them. So there is that opportunity for flexibility in what you design that's particular to your organization. The clause now seeks to ensure that creating and updating of documented information ensures clear identification, format, media, and review for adequacy and suitability. It also seeks to ensure that information is protected and that distribution, access, and retrieval are managed effectively as well. Many organizations I audit have SharePoint sites or commercial EMS packages that have many of these features programmed directly into them. Further, this change should embrace more point-of-use technologies I see in the field, especially in the chemical sector for process and emissions control schemes, DCS and PLC programming, and work management systems to demonstrate effective maintenance and repair of critical equipment controlling significant aspects. Clause 8 of the revised standard basically incorporates our old friends 4.4.6 and 4.4.7 with a few new or enhanced twists. Contracted resources, outsourced activities, and external influences from interested parties need to be controlled or influenced. While it is not always easy to control or influence upstream material providers, especially when they are large corporations, the standard requires this to be assessed nonetheless. Consideration of life cycle control of products or services should be considered. For example, information on use, storage, and disposal of products with product packaging. Another consideration may be the product packaging. Like Clause 7, Clause 9 covers a lot of ground, including important requirements with some changes that you should be aware of. Clause 9.1 now incorporates the former clauses 4.5.1 and 4.5.2, monitoring and measurement, and evaluation of compliance. Clause 9.2 now covers former internal audit clause 4.5.5, and 9.3 now covers the former management review clause 4.6. We'll take a deeper dive into 9.1, 9.2, and 9.3 to provide some insight to changes in these core processes of any management system. Monitoring of significant environmental impacts has been changed to monitoring environmental performance. Criteria to evaluate performance and effectiveness beyond a few compliance metrics and perhaps a few objectives and targets are likely in order now. Think about the sub-processes that support objectives. For example, there may be a process or emissions monitoring that supports demonstration of continual compliance, perhaps not called out as a regulatory requirement, but a best management practice for managing risks. Ensuring that these processes produce valid results is now expected. A word about process versus procedure auditing is in order here. Within your EMS, there are processes for managing resources, operational processes, along with monitoring and improvement processes defined by the standard. Moving your internal audit program beyond procedural auditing should assure effectiveness of the system overall. As an example, consider a manufacturing process area. There are resource processes involved, materials, energy, labor. There are operational controls that may produce emissions or waste to be managed. There are monitoring processes to assure efficiency and emissions control or reduction. Process auditing here really assesses how different processes work together as a system. And that's important moving forward with the requirements of the standard. Management review continues with some new criteria for periodic review. In addition to internal issues and monitoring, external influences and interested party perspectives need to be considered further. In the past, we considered external agency communications, complaints, awards, and emerging changes to regulation as our sphere of external influence. The challenge now is to understand influences beyond these, such as water availability and intensity, greenhouse gas profiles, and energy use and conservation. So these changes, these external influences, need to now be considered as part of your management system, and especially in the context of the management review, where these have an influence or a changing influence on the management system. Consideration of trends in environmental performance beyond compliance demonstration should be considered. For example, are emission excursions causes being assessed and excursions prevented from reoccurrence as a means to improve overall performance? Here's an example where the excursion event itself, in order to reduce the number and frequency of these type of things, taking a deeper dive into root cause and looking at the trend, what are common causes for an excursion event so that they can be prevent recurrence. Are opportunities to use other management systems and business risk management measures within the organization being leveraged? A lot of companies now have business continuity plans or enterprise risk management systems in place. Sometimes there's opportunity to leverage those in. Is there a need for top management to act on any implications for changes to strategic direction of the organization? Are there product changes planned, and can operational changes be made to continue to assure compliance and performance? Mergers and acquisitions have recently grown in making headlines these days. Are there potential leverage points from a merger that need to be incorporated into the management system? Is there a change in risk tolerance associated with new owners? My experience with mergers and acquisitions is that new requirements or similar requirements come in from another organization that may have had their independent management system in place, and there's that opportunity to look for best practices amongst the merged entities. Finally, Clause 10 brings our old good friend nonconformity and corrective action into the revised standard. Notice that preventive action is not in the clause any longer. Organizations should still determine if similar nonconformities could potentially exist as part of corrective action planning. Preventive action is now considered part of planning in Clause 6.1.1. Among things to be addressed include risk and opportunities to prevent or reduce undesired effects, as the standard says in 6.1.1. Many organizations I've visited have robust processes in place for nonconformity management, often integrated across standards with measures for root cause determination and verification of effectiveness. These should continue to be sufficient to address the requirements here. And finally, the organization shall continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the EMS to enhance environmental performance. That's an important conclusion in 10.2 of the Management System Standard, and one of the things that the management review really ought to verify to demonstrate conformity to the standard at 10.2. We've located the key changes discussed in Part 1 in the revised standard. We've mapped out the relocated clauses and subtle changes too. Again, take a look at ISO 14001:2015 Annex A, the guidance on the use of the standard, for more detail on the significance of these changes to your management system in particular. Thank you for your time. If you have questions, please feel free to email me at bbarnes@compliance-design.com for further consideration and consultation.